Okay, we're going to go to the final step. In between the underpainting and this step, you will have rendered, correctly decided your composition, traced the lines you want, and transferred it onto the underpainting. Great thing about doing the tracing paper step is you can move it around to see how it's going to fall, because the goal here is to save the beautiful things and cover, not completely, but soften the areas where it doesn't work so well. For example, this feels ugly to me. So that's an area strategically that I would want to soften in some way or break up. Whereas something over here that I love, or something over here that I love within here, I would save. So when you put it on there, you want to really think about how you're going to handle leaving things white and how you're going to strategically use the space. Usually the first thing you do is the negative space. You can turn it upside down and drip down, or you can do even wash, or you can do flare out, just like on the other project. So you have your toolbox of techniques that you can use. You can also do wet and wet in the back. But since there's so much wet and wet here, I'm feeling like I want to do a little more either flare out or glaze or even wash. You can also do a controlled wet and wet blend of value. If you want to create an atmosphere, you could dampen the back and bring in a value scale into the image. That's something I might explore. The main thing is don't introduce new color. Only use hues that were from the original picture. So you don't want to create a whole new composition of color. There's a lot of gray and blue in this picture, so I'm going to slowly incorporate that, but into the hues that I already have. So you can exaggerate that color if it falls into this underpainting. Hard to explain, of course, but it will depend on your subject. I just don't think I want to do a flare out, so I'm going to do more of a controlled wet and wet blend. So what I'm going to do is slightly dampen the back. No matter what, the first thing you want to treat is your negative space. And I want to only get the damp up to the edge. Oops, it's dirty. I want to get the edge, and sometimes actually dirty water is better because you can see where the edge is, especially since you can barely see my lines from up there. So I'm just applying water very carefully around. You never want to leave a halo. You want to go straight to the edge of your line of your object. If you don't get all the way to the edge, it gets really weird. And in fact, this soft orange is working really well for me. A lot about watercolor is things happening inadvertently that are beautiful. So I'm doing kind of a soft, controlled, wet and wet blend from the edge into the negative space. But you can see even here, I missed a spot. If you don't fill it in to the edge, you get this really weird halo. I want to keep dampening. So I've got some really pretty soft, controlled blend here. I'm using this brush as a sponge in here. And now I'm able to integrate into that area that I love so much. Now I got to figure out this other side, of course leaving white on the edge. You don't want to fill all the way to the edge. Sometimes people do, and it works okay, but it's better to wait and see if it needs to go to the edge, because then once you lose the white, it's a done deal. So here I am doing around here. And it, just like in the other one, you don't know if you're going to use a lost and found line. I want to make it really light here because this is one of my favorite spots. And I'm going to leave this white in here. This is all very slow and strategic. Once you do one thing, you got to look around and see what else you might want to do. I'm going to take my brown hue well, it's not really brown, but it's a combination of things. And I'm going to start using a little bit of this brown, but with a bluer cast, just to make it darker so that my negative space goes back. And I'm flaring out a little here, but I'm flaring out gently because I don't want a harsh piece. It depends on your subject. Your subject might be really jarring and something you want to flare out. Whoops, that wasn't good. But other subjects like this to me are soft. And I'm trying really hard not to define a line. I'm defining a shape of negative space. Up here again, it's so beautiful. I don't want to overdo, so I'm going to do a little bit of lift out so it doesn't get too harsh. You can see I missed a spot here. Before it dries, I gotta get right up to the edge. What's cool about this yellow carbon is it's actually beautiful in terms of color, and you might end up using it. I find that I'm letting it sit a little more than covering it up, just because it works well. But I'll probably cover it up more in other areas. I don't want this to dry too hard. Do a little flare out, boom, 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 boom. So really I've done now a lift out, beautiful controlled wet and wet, kind of an even wash over here, and then a little flare out over here. Little bit of dry brush, but it's so light and delicate that it's not jarring. Sometimes these things are intense and you want that. You want it to be really bold and crazy, but I'm not feeling it on this one. And less is more, because you can always let it dry, come back, and re-examine. Once you go too strong too fast and it's too much, then unfortunately you have to start the whole project all over, which sometimes is a good thing. See, here I'm covering the yellow. You can see how I'm leaning on my pinky to get that clean edge. Okay, what do I want to do next? Okay, I have a little more negative space to do over here. A lot of the times, this is as far as people go and is done. I'm mixing this yellow, orange, but I'm adding some of this brown to get a neutral, because I want to integrate these two things, and I'm going to do the same thing with the wet and wet. It's good to have a big brush that you can quickly cover an area. So the key is not defining everything. It's much more interesting to define things selectively. It makes the viewer much more challenged and engaged and curious and seeking out information and standing there a while and seeing the technique and trying to figure out the intention. If you just line everything, fill everything, tell the whole story right off the bat, this is what it is, this is a bucket of flowers, this is a tree, this is a person, it's like they go, oh, that's a person. And a lot of people like that. A lot of people just like to see something that they know. But people who are trained in design and really know how to look at art in any way, art history, whatever you take that makes you see differently, you're looking for that mystery and magic. So we're just exploring technique. I'm getting in here. You can shift to a smaller brush. I'm just comfortable with this one right now. You know, I got a little dry edge. Do I want to keep it? I don't think so. I'm basically redoing my even wet and wet. And the reason I redid it is because this got so strong that I had to do something to define a little bit more. This got a little heavy for me. I think I overworked it. So I might just blob a little of this here to take away from the feeling of overworking. Basically, it's like, if you can't salvage it, you got to start over. But if you can salvage it, just try to make it intentional. Make it look intentional. Like, no one's going to know that I blobbed that there because I felt like this was heavy-handed. But in the end, it might be a good thing. I might have stumbled upon something inadvertently, which I'm digging right now. I mean, this is, all right, spread that out a little. I'm liking this because you know what I just created was a glaze. Not as effectively as if I let it dried and did a glaze the next day, but I created a bit of a glaze. And it's starting to have some qualities that I like. Now I have to decide what I'm going to be filling in here. Right now I'm only using flat brushes. At some point I might want to get in there with a round. I'm going to start exploring that pear color that was on this area. I'm not painting the pear though. See, this is the thing. Okay, this is the standard thing. People go, I'm going to fill in the pear, I'm going to fill in the pear. That's what I'm going to do. But what you ought to think about is I'm going to use this color and these values to reinvent this section so that I can mimic that pear without completely painting it in. You might paint in a section of it, such as here. Because it's a cool opportunity for glazing and a little hard edge, because I don't have any hard edge yet. And I could do a little bit of information about it without saying overtly what it is. And it's a weird shape pair anyway, so it might be weird to define. But I'm just picking and choosing based on what technique I want to use. And the other thing I'm doing is starting to obscure those lines, because we don't want this whole thing to be a line drawing. So now I feel like this might be a good opportunity to do a bunch of glazing in here. I may have to come back so it doesn't run together like that. But it just occurred to me that this area is not the most beautiful. So this is one of those spots where it calls for doing a few internal marks. But a lot of the times there's absolutely no need to do anything because it just works on its own. There was just so many linear things going on here that I chose to, I'm going to let that run together. Sort of like a combo glaze and wet and wet. And it gives me an opportunity for a little burst of green because there's a little green in the stem. But instead of painting in the stem, I'm leaving the stem blank and painting green nearby so that somebody can figure out the relationship. That's about it. I don't want to do too much here. That's, you know, that's enough information. And I'm also obscuring these lines a little. You can even let the yellow of the carbon kind of mix in with your paint to create a different hue. I'm going to blot this because there's a highlight there. Not blot, but lift out. All right, better. So, okay. One of the things I want you to do on here is drip down. It's very challenging to show this without turning the paper sideways and hang it on the wall. So I'm going to finish doing a few things, and then I'll take the phone off the stand and use the drip down method. I just want to do a couple more areas like this with a little bit more blue and brown. And just to feel the fold of that napkin shape, and kind of creating some visual directions.